In the span of just a few generations, Americans have become obsessed with the way we eat. We're vegans, freegans, locavores, and advocates of paleo diets. But despite this increased attention to what we put into our bodies, America is still the most obese nation on Earth. So we're thinking about food in different ways, but are we thinking about it in the right ways? It's our subject tonight, the way we eat, from Chicago, Illinois. This is The Business of Life. Hello, I'm Michael Moynihan, and welcome to The Business of Life, coming to you this week from Chicago, Illinois. Ask yourself a question. If you eat an organic apple every day, will you live longer? Should you pay those extra few dollars for fair trade coffee? And should you avoid or celebrate genetically modified foods? These are, of course, luxury questions, because while some of us are surrounded by farmers markets and whole food outlets, some experts argue that a large percentage of the population has neither the money nor access to healthy food. And the terrible truth is, the United States is still at the top of the table in global obesity rankings. So, can organic foods, GMOs, greater access to fresh food save us? Today we're going to find out. And as always, we'll break down the issue using facts, figures, dollars, and cents. And I'm joined by a panel of experts desperate to answer the question, should we change the way we eat? Let's meet them. Katherine Mangu-Ward is the managing editor of Reason Magazine, where she focuses on food, education, and technology. In the latest issue, she offers a full-throated defense of Flamin' Hot Cheetos. This is actually true, I read it today. Frederick Kaufman is a contributing editor at Harper's Magazine and the author of Bet the Farm, How Food Stopped Being Food, a book that you should all buy. Danielle Nierenberg is an author and activist and the founder and president of Food Tank, a think tank focused on food sustainability and solutions to hunger, poverty, and obesity. And she's the author of Happier Meals, Rethinking the Global Meat Industry. Welcome, all of you. Thanks for being here. Let's begin with our first topic, fat Americans. Now, before I go further in this, we had a bit of a debate about whether we should have fat Americans. Is this offensive? One of the reasons for this, by the way, is I used to live in Europe, and this is something that I hear a lot. Fat Americans. Oh, you fat Americans. Are we? Well, let's look at our first number, 50. That's the number of states that have an obesity rate over 20%. In 1995, 0 states had that high of an obesity rate. Danielle, let's define the term.
You know, I don't like the term fat. It's a subjective term. What we're talking about is really a public health crisis. And when you have so many states where people are experiencing what is a health problem, we have to do something about it. A lot of people don't have access to healthy food. They don't have the education to cook healthy food. We need better ways to make people healthier.
Katherine? This is a #1 ranking that I don't want. So how did this happen?
It is true. If we're going to look for sort of places to be #1, you know, girth is not our first choice. I also have some qualms with the word fat, despite generally being a sort of non-politically correct and a horrific person. And that's because being fat is an aesthetic problem. When Europeans or somebody says fat Americans, what they're saying is, you know, we find you aesthetically displeasing. And then there's this kind of class angle. And I think that's something that people don't like to talk about. Skinny people are rich people in America. Fat people are poor people. And the skinny rich people spend a lot of time telling fat poor people that they shouldn't eat the foods they like.
Let's be real here for a second.
Oh, are we starting that
Yeah,
now?
we're starting right. We're starting reality. This is fiction. It's fiction that's coming from your mouth. If you don't have a lot of money to spend on food, it actually might be a pretty smart choice to spend your $5 a day that you have on food to get as many calories as possible into your body. I mean, maybe there's a very wise reason why somebody who doesn't have a lot of money to spend on food is going to get as much calories and go to McDonald's.
Sure, and I think they should be allowed to do that. For instance, in Los Angeles, where the zoning laws prohibit the opening of new fast food restaurants in low-income neighborhoods. That's a very sort of condescending way of saying to fat people, or saying to poor people, oh, you only have $5 to spend on dinner, you're not allowed to spend it at McDonald's.
It's not a question of being allowed. It's a question of, like, what is available to you? What can you afford? What is accessible? And if the only crap that's available to you is fast food restaurants, people don't necessarily want to eat that. They don't necessarily want to spend their $5 on that. They have no choice.
You know, this is what I get when I ask a broad question to begin with. I get a broad answer in a fight already. But, you know, how do Americans perceive themselves, which I think is an interesting thing. So let's look at this next number. Last year, Americans were 12% less likely to describe themselves as overweight as they were in 1991. Well, today, 2 out of 3 Americans are overweight. Katherine, are we getting fatter and we don't seem to realize it? I mean, what's going on here?
Yes, definitely. But I think one reason that we are less conscious of our weight is precisely because we're better at dealing with the consequences of being fat. And again, if your problem is that you don't like it, that you're surrounded by fat people, and frankly, I don't like it when I'm surrounded by fat people. That's why I live in an urban area with lots of young, rich people.
You don't?
Yeah.
You don't like being around fat people?
Nobody likes being around fat people.
Really? You know this is on television,
Yeah,
right?
no, I know.
Okay.
No,
they can hear you.
Wait, what's wrong with fat people?
Danielle?
I'm just astounded. I don't even know what to say to that. Because, I mean, you know, you're saying you don't want to be around a certain class of people because you've already said that it's poor people who are fat. And so, I mean, it's a race issue and it's a cultural issue.
Here's the big difference between you and me, though. I don't want to stop fat people from making their own choices.
I don't want to stop fat people from making their own choices. The fact is, they don't have any choice. If you're a single mother and you have this much money to buy food with, you're going to do what Fred said. You're going to put the most calories in your kids that you can to make them happy so you can get to your other job.
All right, let's move on to the next number. To Katherine's point, compared with non-overweight people, the obese are 37 times more likely to report employment discrimination. For the severely obese, that number ticks up to 100 times. Has anyone here seen something like this? Seen somebody whose weight is clearly having an effect on either their sort of job prospects, their social prospects? Anybody?
So I don't know many people that are morbidly obese, but I do know people that are in very competitive industries like finance and physics and mathematics who do note that employers will actually discriminate based on your size, simply because people that are larger have lower productivity, they have less energy, they're less enthusiastic, which I don't know if is accurate or if it's just a stereotype.
Frederick, it's an interesting point. I mean, we talk about the costs that, you know, the government incurs when people are unhealthy. What is the role that government should play in making people eat healthy or sort of nudging them towards healthy behavior?
Well, I think the government is already very involved, mostly with funding and giving tax breaks to very large food companies. All these huge, monstrous companies that are getting tax breaks, that are international, that are
This is an easy kumbaya, right? Though nobody likes corporate food subsidies.
You're interrupting me.
Yeah, that's how we do on TV.
Maybe we should mandate, just as we do with cigarettes, that maybe some of that money that they've made maybe should go to education, that maybe you don't have to have a soft drink this big. Maybe it should be that big, as we're doing once again with the other public health hazard, which is cigarettes, saying, okay, then you guys have to pay to show people the dangers of your product. Well, there's a real danger in that soda.
All right, let's look at our next number. In 1995, a U.S. women's size 2 would be a size 6 by today's standards. In 1970, a size 2 would be a size 12. Danielle, I mean, there's a gendered element of this, isn't there? I mean, the 31-inch waist is 31 inches, right? It doesn't move. Why is this so specific? And are we also trying to kind of trick ourselves?
We're definitely trying to trick ourselves. I mean, what woman doesn't want to tell, you know, her husband that she's wearing a size 2 rather than a size 6 or a 16 or whatever it is? I mean, a lot of this is very disturbing. And I think, you know, I know we're talking about obesity, but we also have an epidemic of eating disorders in this country with bulimia and anorexia and everyone trying to be smaller and smaller than they are.
Katherine, do we treat obesity in women in a different way?
Sure, it's definitely gendered. And I think, you know, one thing that you see, I know that this sort of eternally pops up in my Facebook feed, is this little, it's a little meme that says Marilyn Monroe was a size 16. Marilyn Monroe's size 16 is something like a modern size 2. It's marketing, right? It's what you are selling to people is the feeling of being skinny.
Yeah.
And turns out that sells like hotcakes.
All right, let's look at this next number. Today, 23.5 million Americans live in food deserts. More than half of those people are low-income earners. Frederick, first of all, what is a food desert? Tell people what that is.
Well, a food desert is simply a geographical space in which you cannot find very basic staple foods, fresh vegetables, grains, the kinds of things that actually might lead to a healthy diet. And increasingly people are doing their shopping at places like food shops and gas stations, where simply they're getting packaged foods and chips. That's what a food desert is, where those kinds of healthy choices aren't available to you.
Danielle, is this really the reason we have so much obesity in this country?
Definitely one reason. And here in Chicago, you know, Mayor Emanuel has tried to put smaller whole foods in low-income areas, thinking that will solve the problem. Okay, people will have more access to healthy food, but it goes deeper than that. We have an education system where kids don't know what healthy food looks like. They don't know that apples are good for them, that broccoli grows from the ground. We need better education, and it's not just school gardens, it's cooking classes, it's teaching kids nutrition again, which is, you know, one of the things that gets cut in government programs when they're trying to save money. We don't teach kids how to eat.
Katherine, food deserts.
I think statistics about food deserts do tend to get a little overhyped. A Walmart opening a short bus ride away from you, again, while not as good as having a Whole Foods on your corner, can dramatically change the way you eat.
Does anyone here live in a food desert? You know, fresh, you do.
Yes, I used to live in a food desert. I lived on the east side and the south side. What happens is you just have the corner stores, and there's so much crime that sometimes you can't make that walk to the bus stop. Like, I'm not gonna go down to the bus stop, grab like 20 bags and risk getting robbed.
You know, Frederick, this has been an interesting point to the point of how do you get Walmart in there? You can't demand somebody come into a neighborhood. How do you do that?
Well, I think there's money in it. I mean, that's the obvious reason. I think actually people do want to be healthy. People want to make those healthy choices. The education is available. I think it's actually out there. If it's not in the schools, people are increasingly becoming aware of what's a better choice. And I think that there's always money in it.
All right, a lot to chew on here, and a lot of... What?
No.
Oh, that was... Oh! Right, I'm gonna leave. See you guys later. Thank you. The other alternative is there's lots to digest. You know, we've talked a lot about a number of amazing, interesting subjects. There's blood all over the floor, and now I want to turn it over to the audience and ask you guys questions. Who's got one? Go right back to this guy with his hand up right there. Yes.
Do any of the panelists have any concrete recommendations for people on a tight budget on how to eat healthy or live a better lifestyle in terms of food?
Yeah, I mean, and it's such a great question. You know, more whole foods, more unprocessed foods, finding, you know, ways to, you know, cook lentils in a crock pot while you're at work, buying in bulk, being able to, you know, eat less processed foods even when it's really difficult for you.
Every single time you hear this question, the word lentils is always lurking, like right there. And it's the right answer, right? Like, it actually, like, lentils, man, they're delicious. They feed basically all of India. It's, you know, you throw some curry leaves in there and, like, you're good to go, dull. You know, genetically modified foods are not unhealthy. Don't worry about eating those. They're cheaper. Go ahead and eat them. There is, I think, a conflation of eating some vegetables with this sort of unscientific approach to food science, which leads people to spend money that they don't have on foods that aren't better.
All right, let's move on to our second topic, eating ethically. And let's look at our first stat here. 57%, that's the number of young adults who believe it is unsafe to eat genetically modified foods. And you also see that the number of young adults who approve of genetically modifying babies is around the same. They'll create a race of superhumans, but just not the rice, right? Is that? What is a GMO food?
there's a sort of conflation between genetically modified organisms, which is a specific technology in which you take little bits of other organisms and put them in food for various purposes, mostly insect and pest control. There's a conflation of that with the general use of technology to improve agriculture, right? So this is the sort of image that you have in your mind of pesticides being sprayed across things or factories that turn corn into sugar. Those things aren't genetic modification, it's different. One thing that genetically modified foods have done is made it so that we use much less harmful chemicals. We use similar volumes, but the chemicals themselves are safer, and I think that's worth keeping in mind.
Okay, here's the deal with GMOs, and it's not really the most popular decision statement I'll make today. I've once made the statement at the New York Public Library and was literally pelted with fruit for saying it. But the fact of the matter is that you're right. There is no widespread evidence that GMO foods are killing us dead. The problem with GMO foods is who owns the food. The food is copyrighted. Copyrighted, licensed, and it's made to be the intellectual property of very large corporations. Let's look at the DNA of a soybean, all right? And think about it as a pile of pennies that goes from the floor all the way to the ceiling. Okay, so if Monsanto adds one more penny of DNA to the top, why is the whole thing theirs? Why is it like, okay, it's all mine now, and if you want these seeds, you must always pay me a royalty? Food has always been open source. I don't have to pay a licensing fee to the Earl of Sandwich every time I make PB&J, okay?
So let's look at our next number. 95% of commercial chickens raised for meat are supplied by 3 companies: the EW Group, Tyson Foods, and Groupe Grimaud. What's the problem with this beyond the fact that my stomach churns when I see it? I mean, by the way, I'm still not going to check where the chicken comes from if I buy something in a store, right?
Oh, I feel bad for you.
I mean, maybe I should. There's only 5% for chickens. I don't know.
The problem with these big factory farms is that they're in so many ways a recipe for disaster. They're a petri dish for diseases and filth. Salmonella, avian flu, lots of things can happen. It's again, a recipe for disaster when so few companies own all of this.
Is the industrialization of food, writ large, is this a bad thing? I mean, people tend to think this is a terrible thing, right?
Right. So there's 2 things going on. My unpopular position is that I actually don't eat meat in my household, which among the crazy right-wingers that I hang out with is like, it's the same as you saying
Hippie.
GMOs are okay.
Among my crazy left-wingers.
Yes, exactly. And I don't, precisely because of the animal welfare concerns, because these factories are so awful. What I think is that 100 years ago, people spent 40% of their income on food. Even 50 years ago, it was something like 30%. And that is absolutely a triumph of industrial agriculture. Freeing up 40% of people's income to do other stuff is a moral triumph in addition to being, something that is sort of convenient.
Not if it's killing us. We haven't had a heckle in a while.
Yeah.
That was a good heckle. Congratulations, Katherine Mangu-Ward, for being heckled. And congratulations, heckler, for being the first heckle in some time. Let's get him a microphone.
Yeah.
Yes,
I don't view it as a triumph if we're talking about all these negative effects of food and the food we're consuming. I don't see, sure, it's freeing up money. We can spend those money on other things like overpriced college and whatever else you want to do, go buy new cars. But I don't view it as a triumph if we're discussing all these things that in ways we're so unhealthy.
I think it's telling that your 2 examples there were education and mobility, which are incredibly important and weren't available basically at all to poor people 100 years ago. A new car and a college education is a tremendous way to bring yourself up out of poverty. It's not just that there are currently bad outcomes, it's what other bad outcomes are we preventing by allowing, commerce to proceed.
All right, let's look at this related number. Since 2008, 110 million people were driven into poverty as a result. and the spike in food prices.
In 2008 and again in 2011, when the price of grain doubled and then doubled again, what you saw was massive global unrest and food riots and regime change. Now, what I was pointing out in Bet the Farm is that part of what drove the spike in commodity prices and global food prices were very large multinational banks betting on the price of food.
Danielle?
I mean, he's absolutely right. Young, hungry, angry people, or hangry people, this is what created, you know, the Arab Spring.
The Arab Spring was a hangry revolution.
It was hangry. When you're hungry, aren't you a little bit grumpy, pissed off?
I mean, I'm not overthrowing Mubarak, but I'm a little annoyed.
If you were hungry every day, and you didn't have a job, and you were spending 80% of your income rather than 15% of your income on food, you'd be pissed off and you'd want to do something about it.
How's your kids hungry? And saying, Daddy, I'm hungry. I think you're pissed off.
It's not a coincidence, though, right, that when there are uprisings, it's uprisings against the state. The people don't have uprisings against speculative banks, and maybe they'd like to.
Wait, I think there was one in this country. It was called Occupy. It's a movement. You might have heard of it.
Right now, in the US, we dramatically restrict imports from all kinds of other countries that would be better suited to grow our food so that we can protect these big corporations in the US. If we were to open up trade, that would be a huge boon to people who in poorer countries.
You look like you're having a heart attack. You okay?
I'm all good.
Because we have paddles in the back. You're right. Okay,
what she's missing is that before 2007 and 2008, when this food and financial crisis began, many countries in the developing world had a practice of agricultural abandonment. They weren't investing in farmers. They weren't investing in agriculture. So now what you're seeing, and this is the only good benefit of this food and financial crisis, is that countries are beginning to invest in agriculture again. And they're doing that in a way that is, supporting small, medium, and large-scale farmers across the board, but there needs to be more of it.
So who here regularly shops at farmers markets, or at least tries to do it once in a while? All right. Go ahead.
Unfortunately, there's people that cannot eat the way that we're talking about, but those of us who can afford it should be doing it, because that's how we get more farmers farming. That's how we get the younger generation of people becoming farmers and feeding local economies, which, like Danielle mentioned, we have enough of. So if we encourage them by shopping locally and going directly to the source and knowing our farmer and having a connection with our food, that food becomes real. And that way we can actually make a change.
There you go. All right, well, let's bring up a related number then. 8,284, the number of farmers markets in the United States. You can see that number is up from 3,706 farmers markets in 2004. Katherine, I know people say it tastes better, and I know there's the argument about supporting the local economy. All this talk about organic. Is it better for us? Should I be eating organic if I can afford it?
Farmers markets, voting with your dollars, I have no objections to that. The question of whether organic food is better for you or better for the environment, you are not commenting, even with your dollars, on that question by shopping it at a farmer's market. And it's an incredibly complex question. It's one that you can't answer by chatting with the farmer at the farmer's market, as pleasant as that may be.
Frederick, is it better for me to buy something, pretending that all the stuff at the farmer's market is organic?
I'm not so sure that there is a specific health benefit to organic, okay? I think that really what we're talking about here, though, is the idea of supporting small farmers, okay? And that's a very good idea, because half of the world's people are fed by about 2 billion what are called smallholder farmers, and half of them are women, okay? And so these women, who are most of the farmers of the world, feed more than half of the people on the planet. And so what we're looking at is this whole notion in a larger sense, not of my own individual health. If we're Americans, can we move off my body, my body, my body? But the idea of sustainability. What is sustainable for the planet? What is sustainable commercially? What is sustainable economically? And I think that's trending in the right direction.
On ethical consumption, let us think beyond the borders of this country and look at this next number. 5,250%. That's the increase in US imports of fair trade certified coffee between 1999 and 2009. Does anyone buy a bag of coffee specifically because it's fair trade? Anyone? The people of Chicago are monsters.
The people of Chicago are amazing. You guys are like GMOs, Farmers Market. You're like, I'm going to Safeway. I'm getting some mac and cheese.
We're handing out cigarettes after the show.
Love it.
A couple things. First of all, let's define this for people who don't know what fair trade coffee is.
Well, fair trade is when a company works with farmers to give them a fair price for their product, and we pay more for it at the grocery store, right? Look at what the Rainforest Alliance has done to work with companies like Unilever and make sure that tea farmers in India and Kenya are treated fairly, are getting a better price for their products, are using less pesticides. And Lipton tea now has the little frog on it. These are big changes in the food industry. And it's not just, me feeling better about my coffee. It's about practices changing on a global level towards environmental and social sustainability.
Frederick, if you had somebody say, should I buy this one fair trade or not, would you recommend that they buy fair trade?
Absolutely, but these things are step by step, and they're gonna take a long time. When I was in Colombia at a finca, at a coffee farm with a fair trade farmer, right? And I'm talking to him about his beans, and when it's time for the harvest, I said to him, who picks them? And in Colombia, well, they're day laborers who get 5 cents a day. Okay, so that's fair trade. So even within that context of fair trade, there's all sorts of exploitation that remains. But guess what? We're getting one step closer, we're getting one step down the line, we're bringing people to think about these issues, and that's all positive. We have to be positive, right? I mean, we can't just sit around being so negative all the time.
This one the guy is like, the world is burning, like 5 minutes ago.
No, that's not, the world is not burning. The world is, it depends where we are in the world, Katherine.
All right, well, right now, I'm gonna give the audience an opportunity to shout down, praise, mau, ask questions. So if anyone in the audience has something they want to say. Yeah, we'll start with you, right there.
How does American public policy affect the choices that manufacturers and consumers are making today when it comes to food?
I mean, American policy is a mess right now. There's a very tangled and long history of agriculture subsidies that are incredibly unappealing and ultimately counterproductive. Also, protectionism on sugar, which makes cane sugar more expensive here in the United States, even as we make corn sugar cheaper. To my mind, opening up trade and reducing subsidies to anyone, big corporation, little guys, would be a great start.
All right, well, another brutal debate on the business of life. I'd like to thank all of our panelists for joining us today, Katherine, Fred, and Danielle, and thank you all for watching, and we'll see you next time on The Business of Life.
Business of Life is made possible by Better Money Habits. It's a free resource that helps you build practical knowledge and take control of your finances. Powered by Bank of America. See more at bettermoneyhabits.com.